Imagine this. It's the mid-2000s. The sun is shining, palm trees sway in the breeze. You're in Palm Beach County, Florida, known as the recovery capital of America. It's a place where people can heal, with a vibrant network of treatment centers, sober homes, and support services for people in recovery from substance use disorders. But beneath that hopeful image, something darker was taking root.
Florida is ridden with pill mills. During a 6-month period, 9 million painkillers were prescribed in just 2 South Florida counties. 7 deaths a day are attributed to people in Florida who illegally use legal drugs.
Opioid prescriptions exploded, pill mills became storefronts of addiction, and the overdoses followed.
We estimate in 2016, based on preliminary data, that we will see 14 plus deaths a day in 2016 from opiate overdoses.
By 2017, Palm Beach County had evolved into the epicenter of Florida's overdose crisis.
All throughout my career, I had battled with drugs and alcohol.
In 2022, the board formed an advisory committee to help guide the response. And last year, that group debated how to spend the newly awarded opioid settlement funds.
How should your local government spend almost $120 million over the next 20 years? That is what Palm Beach County leaders are deciding as they look at plans to spend the county's share of money from the recent opioid settlements with pharmaceutical companies.
In 2022, the board formed an advisory committee to help guide the response. They appointed a drug czar, and they reimagined recovery through a patient-centered lens. Their recommendation? Spend the money on acute care? Nope. They went for a total paradigm shift. They recommended to spend 90% of the funds on social determinants of health, things like housing, job training, youth prevention, and community support. The last 10% would go toward acute care. This is a total reversal from the national norm. So, how does that kind of shift happen, and who inspired it? What does real person-centered care look like? And what can other governments learn from Palm Beach County's approach to addressing substance use disorder? This is Empathy Affect, Forsmarsh Media's podcast that explores the human side of government. I'm Melissa Szynski. Today, we're joined by John Hulick, Palm Beach County's former drug czar. We spoke with him just a couple of weeks ago before he departed from his position. But John has long been a leader in the national recovery movement and brings a unique perspective. He's a person in long-term recovery, a parent who's walked this road with his daughter, and a former executive director of New Jersey's Governor's Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse. So, we've just told you some of the story that got Palm Beach County here. And now, we'll dive in with John at the moment he stepped into this role. What did he find? What's changed? And what gives him hope for what's ahead? John, welcome to Empathy Affect. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Excellent. Hey, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Of course. So you're joining us from Palm Beach County, Florida, where you serve as the county's drug czar. At the top, I teed up how the substance use landscape evolved in the county. But when you were tapped to enter your position, what did you view as the biggest challenges before you and the county?
No, hey, my pleasure, Melissa. Thank you again for the invitation to be with you and to impart some of our lessons learned here in Palm Beach County, which I think have been really significant over actually now a couple of decades. The first challenge was when I looked at the response plan of 2017, what first struck me was the word recovery wasn't even a part of the plan, so we were starting from a deficit, particularly for me and my decades of experience and being a part of the seminal events that launched a recovery movement in the early 2000s. And which subsequently became the Faces and Voices of Recovery, which became and is the national advocacy organization for individuals in recovery from substance use disorder. So that was a significant deficit. Part of it, too, was environmental, changing mindsets. I was in my first appearance before the board, really laid out a stake in the ground and the vision for the county, which was we were going to move from a treatment-centric system of care to one that was much more person-centered or recovery-oriented. It was not a new concept. We'd had a whole body of work a couple of decades prior. But deploying and operationalizing that type of environment is very difficult because you have vested interest in the past. And when I say environmental as well, it is, typically in my experiences, particularly in the policy realm, as the concerns around substance use disorder, mental illness would raise to the top of decision makers' attention. All kinds of solutions get floated. A lot of them, again, vested interest solutions. Primarily, we need more treatment. So changing that mindset to one that there is actually a way to reducing the need for treatment, or at least the level of care or the amount of treatment that governmental entities purchase. But in order to do that, there are a number of elements that needed to be in place to achieve what the aim for the county was at that time, and still is we wanted to improve long-term recovery outcomes. So it was a very great vision, and incrementally over time, we've infused that vision with very specific mechanisms, goals, and objectives in order to be where we are today.
Yeah. It comes to my attention that, initially off that response, you were saying that recovery wasn't part of the plan. And clearly recovery is very near and dear to your heart, and the way you've advocated for it is very clear. And, also a lot of people who work in the substance use disorder and recovery space tend to be touched by addiction or have been in recovery themselves. And I know that you proudly stand among those folks as someone in long-term recovery. And you've also supported your daughter through, her own recovery and struggles with addiction. So would you mind pausing right now to share a bit about you and your daughter's journeys in recovery, especially as you've walked this path while also serving communities who are touched by substance abuse too?
Thank you. And I don't know if I should say gladly or sadly or heartbreakingly. It's been I call it a journey, you call it a path. I am long in the tooth in terms of my own personal recovery, almost 40 years, 39 years of recovery in in March. So it's been an incredible journey in that way, with many, many struggles throughout that, walking that path. I could have never imagined. I always joke that I got sober at 12, so I'm still a youngster at heart, I guess. But, and it really laid open for me a walk through life that I could have never imagined personally and professionally, and I gained entree into this field early in my recovery. I met a deaf individual in a 12-step meeting and was perplexed about how this individual was in any way supposed to recover. And, through that work, founded an agency in 1988 called Signs of Sobriety. So that was my first entree into this field professionally. I subsequently met my wife, who was deaf herself, and 3 children and 2 grandchildren later, which we took custody of because of my daughter's early onset mental illness and subsequent substance use disorder. I've worn many hats in this space, one of which is a grandparent raising, our substance using daughter's children. So where I thought I was going to stop at 3 children, we've actually had 5. So, it's been quite the struggle, but nothing honestly has taught me more than navigating her care from the first clinical intervention at 5th grade. By 6th grade, she was institutionalized before she ever started using substances.
Wow.
I call it the teen mom drama. We did the teen mom drama. My wife used to watch Teen Mom on MTV. I would say, why are you watching this? We're living it. I don't need to watch it on TV, and it just, honestly, one system's failure after another is really all I can say. And, by the time, mid 2010, around 2015, I'd really kind of made a commitment myself to get away from this field, largely due to a lot of frustration over what I was experiencing, and promised myself I would never be back. So here I am. But the real travesty, and it's been a number of those, was in 2017 when she was violently struck down as a result of an assault and lied in a coma for 6 weeks, and with no expectation that she was going to survive. And when she emerged from that coma, neurosurgeon and the critical care staff and every level of care, subsequent to the initial attack, just described her as a miracle, which was true. And I wished that in her story that was the end, and there was glory afterwards. But we navigated then the TBI care system, and I just incredibly fed up. And if it weren't due to a friend and colleague of mine who said, John, if you could do something, what would you do? And it really, during that period and just a bit prior, begin to thought really critically about, gosh, John, you've had this career of advocacy and, lobbying for more treatment, successfully so in the state of New Jersey. What would you do? And it really laid down the gauntlet for me. And that work of 2 or 3 years prior to my arrival in Palm Beach County made the transition from an approach perspective, a lot easier for me. And I knew the challenges of government. I knew the challenges of changing mindsets and I actually took a pledge at one point that the words more treatment would never leave my lips again, and they haven't. So, that brought us to our beginnings in Palm Beach County, and really, those visions of 2015 and, that type of work really informed this systemic approach that we've implemented here in Palm Beach County.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about your daughter, and I can hear coming from you how lucky she is to have the support that you and your family bring to her. I'm not sure many in this field carry this kind of firsthand experience, one so rooted in the recovery community. So when you did end up in Palm Beach, how did you connect with the impacted people, and how did that inform the way you developed the opioid response plan?
I am a bottom-up, authentic voice, nothing about us without us kind of guy, right? That is the recovery movement. It really sprung from the disabilities movement and the adoption or enactment of the American with Disabilities Act. Those with lived experience, those being impacted or, provided care by a system, their voices should be respected and, strongly integrated, into the work. So that was, my priority. So when I first arrived here, I literally, within 2 weeks of sitting in an office in a dank county office building in West Palm Beach, I was like, well, I could sit here, impress my colleagues on how hard I am working, or I understood very clearly, I called it community immersion. So I really set, a foot to just immerse myself. I was the new kid on the block, and I would not say no to a meeting. I didn't care if it was evening, weekend event. I was there to listen, but I was also there to educate, because, it's the environmental, that I call it tilling the soil activity, right? We got to till the soil to create an environment that's conducive to the change we seek. And I knew the change we were seeking. We had already laid out that vision. But we had to do some environmental work as well, and it took some heart-wrenching conversations with parents, affected family members, parents of loss, who, as we listened and I listened, inevitably they would say, "Well, if my son or daughter would only have had another treatment stay," and I would pause and acknowledge, understanding, in my own journey with my daughter's care, you always wish the next time would be the charm. And then when I would ask the subsequent question, well, son or daughter, what was it that was missing in their care? And inevitably, they would talk about what we were trying to build here. The problems around stable housing and employment, the barriers to employment, not a meaningful community support system. In fact, they're going back to a phase of discharge where the two of the key or critical predictors of longer term recovery outcome are housing and stability and employment. And we put the burden squarely on the newly recovering individual. It said, basically, fend for yourself. The provider got paid. The discharge plan looked remarkably familiar to that of 40 years ago. And we expect them to succeed. And we talk so much about stigma in our field externally, but we really don't focus much on how we stigmatize our own people. But what happens is we say, what did that individual do wrong, rather than assessing critically how the system might have performed better, because we've gotten into this vicious trap of the revolving door. I lapse, I go into the deepest level of care, which is medical detoxification, and we start that cycle again and again. And it's just, if we're truthful, it's been a failure. Mm-hmm. We have individual successes, but we've really had no meaningful ways of measuring outcomes.
With a gap in how to measure successful systemic outcomes, John and Palm Beach County drove a focus on resilience in its recovery strategy. Not just whether someone is receiving treatment, but whether they have the foundation to thrive in recovery. The county did this by introducing a Recovery Capital Index, which measures the social, personal, and cultural factors that support or hinder someone's recovery journey. Think of it like this. We look at broad domains like housing, employment, family support, spiritual connection, and safety. Under these domains are indicators, specific measurable factors that, when taken together, can predict how well someone is likely to do in recovery. So instead of just asking, are you in treatment? The real questions become, do you have stable housing? Do you have a job? Are your family connections supportive? Do you feel safe? This is where a breakthrough happened. Palm Beach County adopted a validated measurement tool, a way to take the pulse of an individual's risk and resilience across these areas. Recovery community centers across Palm Beach County can now use this instrument to create individualized recovery plans and menus of opportunities to build resilience based on real data, not just guesswork.
So those centers would use the instrument to develop individualized recovery plans for individuals. The center itself, our contract says you may provide certain services, but we call menu of opportunities to build resilience. The centers would then analyze the data and develop from the data what types of menus of opportunity would develop. But then, of course, the county takes the collective data, and we have risk resilience factors. So every which way we're analyzing data, but primarily risk resilience, strengths, areas that we need to address. And, top of the list, housing, transportation, employment, financial well-being, safety is there.
This data-driven approach shaped Palm Beach County's bold 2024 plan for the opioid settlement funds we mentioned at the top of the episode.
And so that data, oriented us toward what has been and is unique to the nation, that the board approved the recommendation of the advisory committee to expend 90% of our opioid settlement funding on social determinants of health and 10% on treatment, which is just absolutely unheard of in the country.
Wow.
Historically, we all know this, it's the reverse. It's 90% treatment, 10% catch can. So that is incredible in terms of being able to infuse additional resources into our work here, including setting aside very specific dollars for not recovery residence capacity, but literally affordable, stable recovery apartment units in a recovery village environment.
Yeah. It's a really holistic view. And you mentioned the opioid settlement funds, which I imagine is kind of game-changing in terms of being able to activate more on this holistic view where you need, again, the housing, the community, the transportation. And I imagine that, requires a lot of investment. So how is the settlement funding making a difference? And where are you putting those dollars towards supporting the people that you're serving?
Yeah, thank you. Good, really good question. One of the things I'm also very proud of here in Palm Beach County is our process has been very methodic thought through. It's engaged, the community members, that authentic voice throughout, and their voices have been weighted much more strongly than likely the vested interest. One of the things we did in the development of the plan and ultimately the expense plan was instituted what normally happens in government is, particularly in a regulatory environment, as there was an official public comment period, which again, we published a draft plan, and we had this 2-week public comment period, which again, I monitor what's happening nationally, and it's again unheard of nationally. So the level of community buy-in was significant. It did not mean, though, that there weren't other pressures to expend the monies differently, and those voices, came to the forefront. But in the commissioner meetings, this plan was considered and ultimately adopted along with the expense plan. The community voice was, won out in a very big way, which was important. So one of the things we there are categorically recovery supports, but not just broadly, just peer support, what we typically hear about. One of the things that we were able to do was to receive a federal research grant where we really tested with a criminally justice involved population, housing supports, care coordination, peer support. And I was surprised that feds approved of what we call a flex fund. And we tied Florida Atlantic University into that research project using a recovery capital framework. And we learned incredible lessons from that, not only the efficacy of those interventions, particularly it was a Department of Justice grant. So DOJ was interested in reduction of CJ recidivism, which we're at 7%, which is way lower than the national average. But the other thing that really came to the forefront was through the research, we learned these indicators I spoke of prior, the strong relation or correlation between these and particular outcomes. I know this sounds kind of geeky in research, but I've been around, a long time, and this field is hurt for really specific types of interventions. What we've had here in Palm Beach County is to, begin to take the mystery out of interventions. And, when a biostatistician is saying to me, John, I've never seen such strong relationships, that kind of perks up your ears. And through that work, with FAU, they stood up at the beginning of this year, Center for Integrated Recovery and Wellness Studies, which is not just an ivory tower effort, but we're inviting community members and affiliates into it because the aim is to continue to focus on the impacts of social determinants of health and deploying the research at the community level, which has always been a struggle, as we well know in the research. So recovery supports, we have an entire category on, it's the upstream analogy, Melissa. If the fish is dying, you might want to do an autopsy on the fish, but you've got to go upstream, right? Mm. So for us, this community and education category, community education and engagement category. Critical to that is establishing throughout Palm Beach County, not just countywide, but across the locales, are what we call resilience and recovery ready communities, really starting to infuse at that level, not only the data, around risk resilience and other data sources, but what tools do we need to go upstream in the community? Because if the environment isn't healthy, it's not going to produce healthy individuals, right? Mm. So, I'm excited about that. I'm not sure I'll be here to see it reach the entirety of its outcome, but at least we'll get a leg up on that. We also funded screening brief intervention referral to treatment, which has been a historical kind of screening instrument that has not been widely deployed. And why is that? We want to catch folks earlier in a disorder cycle than what we typically deal with, which is a moment of crises. Doc's office usually don't do that because they don't have a meaningful place to refer. So one of our big remaining pieces of the puzzle here in Palm Beach County is making much more meaning of the 211 calls, which annually are about 16,000, half of which are categorized as crises, and triaging individuals at that moment, engaging them in their care. So if there's an expert screening throughout the community, they have a ready, meaningful referral rather than, and most docs are just saying, I'm not going to do it because I struggle with knowing where to refer.
Yeah. As you were talking there, you were mentioning that throughout this conversation, actually, community immersion is such a big part, involving the community, getting their feedback. I'm sure that's a big part in rebuilding trust in treatment systems and in, all these systems that you say have, failed you and your daughter even before. I'm sure other folks have felt that. And given the county's history of treatment fraud and malfeasance and how systems have failed people, what has it been like rebuilding trust, and how do you focus on that throughout your work?
Well, and I don't know that my aim is to say, I have to get people to trust me. I think it's about the integrity. Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? So if you've monitored my work, over my time here, beginning with a layout of an early vision and just incrementally what's happened. Has it, I'm equally frustrated. Has it moved as quickly as I would have liked it? Absolutely not. But sometimes speed is the enemy of, doing something well, right? I mean, there were literally suggestions, recommendations as we accrued some of this opioid settlement money. Let's spend it all up front. The need is great. I'm like, wait a minute here, not so fast. You're just going to waste this money. I call them investments. These are investments. These are systemic investments that are going to create this hopefully a chance at 100% opportunity for success. But it's not been a singular effort by me. It has been again this community voice, or parents of loss, and they're tired. They have to relive that trauma. And look, I am not absent my daughter's care, just even right around Christmas time and subsequently. I mean, and we've gone through incarceration. I mean, I can but I can't live that, much like I can't list every day the perpetual loss that our people have experienced. I'm still in that community. And when I got initially in recovery, I call cutting my teeth in a clubhouse in Trenton, New Jersey. And there was an old timer there called Tommy the Bull. Everybody had a nickname, Bicycle Bob, Joe the Pipe. But Tommy said to me, and he called me kid, kid, just keep coming, don't drink, go to meetings. But he said, oh, you might want to buy a suit because you will be attending a funeral or two. And what Tommy meant back then in 1986 was, John, that's a year, and for us, as we saw the height of the epidemic, it was a funeral or two a day. And this regular occurrence for us of hugging someone one day and dying the next, so we could literally be in a perpetual state of grief if we chose to be, but there's something that you just have to put that aside. And again, the vision and the work kind of pulls you ahead, and it's mucky. It's particularly when you introduce new funding, you get what you would expect to get, right? A lot of interest, a lot of folks now that want to gain a part of that revenue stream. But, thank goodness for a plan, a vested community. And I'd like to think that we probably survived the biggest of that. And again, what we have just were emerging from a period of putting our dollars out to RFP. We've had review panels. Recommendations are soon to be made. I think by tomorrow, go to contract, and, it'll just continue to further our work here in Palm Beach County.
Yeah. As you've talked about the plans, the funding involving the community, it's been a lot of work leading up to this moment. From where you sit now, what are some of the biggest successes or milestones that you've seen so far?
Well, clearly, and what we envisioned in terms of these recovery community centers, we started with one in Delray Beach. We expanded to a second in Lake Worth Beach. And if you know anything about government, there was some additional available dollars. And if you don't obligate it, it's going to go somewhere else. So we then really took a big leap from 2 to 4. And that really necessitated to have a countywide recovery community organization that we call the Recovery Community Hub Palm Beach County that has oversight of the 4 local centers. It's all bottom up. It's community led. There's a community RCO development process. There's a leadership team. So that's this authenticity to that voice. But, that big, and I didn't envision that entire network when this first started, but now we have engagement points throughout Palm Beach County, not only brick and mortar, but what we also call affinity groups. If folks have a specified interest, I don't care if it's the arts or whatever it is, but if they want to kind of coalesce and develop some activities, there's seed money available in order for them to do that, as long as they tie to a brick and mortar. I mean, that was really a big deal. I have to say, too, the wisdom of tying our work to Florida Atlantic University, I couldn't have ever imagined. I had my senses, some hope, but I could have never predicted what has resulted from our federal research project, and particularly the standing up of the center out of Palm Beach County. This continued operationalizing this resilience environment. All of these are just incredible, and our work is now, it was that particularly this last plan was written as a playbook to get feedback throughout the nation, from other states that whatever we've toiled and sweated here in Palm Beach County might ease their work in some other area of the country. I think is a real kudos to Palm Beach County, coming from that black eye of the past to truly leading in the nation in terms of the recovery capital of the nation.
Yeah. What's coming next for you? And what would success look like? As especially since the money from the opioid settlement will last quite a while, plans are evolving, things are in motion. What's coming next for you?
Well, a couple things, big things. This recovery, wellness, and village concept that I worked on in Trenton, New Jersey, that really informed our systemic approach here. We've had a number of bites at that apple. We have parked some dollars, some opioid settlement dollars to see that to fruition. We've actually gotten to the point of rendering on a 106 unit development with 80,000 square foot of mixed use square footage, including what would be literally a hub or a recovery community center, and any other square footage would have to contribute to resilience in some way. So I'm really hoping that comes to fruition. In the meantime, we're looking at other ways of building out affordable capacity, not just in the recovery residence environment. So that's exciting. That really, if there is one big remaining piece for us, it is what we call that neutral care environment. Let's take these various intercept points in Palm Beach County, particularly the calls to 211 or 988, and have a meaningful engagement there, and then engage an individual and then drive their care right into a non-clinical environment. And what that produced in New Jersey, and it's modeling what we did in New Jersey, where I massaged that model a little bit, although we had tried to achieve an extension of the intervention in New Jersey into the non-clinical environment, i.e. the recovery community centers. We were never successful in doing that, but we have the aim here is to do that as well. So, engage people in treatment, but the aim is long-term recovery outcomes. So the longer we can engage people and keep an eyeball on their care, the better we are able to achieve that outcome. And after 25 years and 150,000 neutral assessments in New Jersey, 85% of the master's level determinations are outpatient, which from a government perspective tells me what I should be purchasing. It's not just about then saving costs, which that will do, because outpatient is much less costly than medical detox or residential. And then we can repurpose those dollars to the more community types of supports. The other thing that we've learned through Columbia University research early on in this project was when you eyeball care and someone lapses, you capture them early enough in a lapse that they don't return back to medical detoxification. So in that project up in New Jersey, only 7% of people ever return back to medical detoxification, which is really unheard of in the nation. So I know that will be true here in Palm Beach County as well. So they are probably the two remaining pieces. I hope they're in place between now and July of next year, because I'm retiring.
Well deserved. I mean, you've had a very long career and you've made big splashes where you've gone. So as we've talked, throughout this whole conversation, it's been so clear that you have a deep personal connection to recovery between yourself and your daughter and your engagement with the community of people in recovery. You've brought that into the fold here with what you're doing in reshaping trust, integrity, efficacy in Palm Beach County's opioid response. So as you said, you've built a playbook of approaches and values and actions that other communities can draw from. So while we've covered a lot of ground today, as we're concluding here, would you like to give some parting advice to states and localities who are also addressing drug abuse?
Read the plan. And at some level, you need a tip of the spear. You can't replicate me. And be the willingness to hear the critique and know that it's not personal. That folks that, remain very affected by systems that are not performing well, that have defaulted to, decades of interventions that just have not really proved efficacious. And I jest about the plan, but in this plan, you're going to see references back to bodies of work, federally. So when I talk about the neutral care environment, literally, it was serendipitous that as this plan was being drafted, the White House Domestic Policy Council issued a playbook on social determinants of health. And one of the key pillars of that playbook was a backbone organization. When you read the elements of it, it was exactly what we're seeking to achieve with the neutral care coordination environment here in Palm Beach County. So it's good. I've always said about the work, I don't want it to, be said that it's good because John Hulick said it's good, because if it's principles before personality. You don't like me, you're not going to like the work. So let the work stand for itself. Let it be validated by research, other authoritative voices. It wasn't made up in the ether. It's been a body of work that we've dared to execute here in Palm Beach County.
Yeah. Amazing. John, thank you so much for sharing your story on the show. Thank you for being so candid about the way addiction and recovery have affected you and your daughter. And I also appreciate you taking the time to walk us through Palm Beach County's journey of recovery and opioid response too.
Excellent. Thank you.
I encourage you to take up John's advice and check out the 2024 Palm Beach County Opioid Response Plan, which we'll link to in our show notes. The plan provides all of the details we chatted about today and can give you some ideas about how to approach your community's SUD recovery in a holistic, patient-centered way. Thanks again to John for sharing his story. If you enjoyed hearing about his journey, make sure to like, rate, and follow the podcast. If you want to give us some extra love, make sure to also share the show with a friend. Even better, if you've stuck around this long to the end, I hope that means you're a super fan. If you are, don't miss out on our new Empathy Effect page on LinkedIn. Go check out the link in the show notes and give us a follow so you stay up to date with our episodes, show polls, and more. In the meantime, I hope you'll join me next time. Thanks, y'all.
Empathy Effect is a product of Forrest Marsh. You can reach us at forrestmarshmedia@forrestmarsh.com with any feedback, questions, or inquiries. If you want to know more about today's guest, are interested in participating with Forrest Marsh, or becoming part of our community, check out our show notes for more information.